I break into the oath of office, just correct me, and I apologize for that. So introduce yourself and give us your testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Bud Brigham. I'm an energy producer, sixth-generation Texan, and happy to be here.
Mr. Brigham, as you do, pull that microphone a little bit closer to make sure we can hear you and make sure the folks who are recording and broadcasting
can you hear me better now?
Yes, sir, I think so. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, I did have a slide deck, and but I will summarize the information in it. I want to make three overview points before getting into a few specifics. In 1980, half the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, that number is now less than 10%. Affordable, reliable energy begets clean water, modern medicine, warmth and light, safe cooking fuels, and the basic necessities that make for human flourishing. The prosperity we enjoy in the United States can be spread across the globe thanks to natural gas, oil, and clean coal. The second summary point, the ESG movement is a sacrifice of the shareholders to virtue signaling. America has never ratified the Paris Agreement. It would seem to violate antitrust laws, and is perhaps treasonous that financial institutions would be forcing companies that they invest with to comply with a foreign treaty that hasn't been ratified by Congress. And I will provide a specific example of that later. Third point, capitalism has been fundamental to American exceptionalism. For American companies to grow and thrive over the long term, they must generate attractive outcomes for all their stakeholders. Capitalism and all its benefits, including to the environment, is sustainable. These coercive movements, such as ESG, are not. Now, I had a slide in my deck projecting the EI data on energy demand forward beyond 2050. And when you see, even by the EI's projections, contrary to the popular narrative, oil and gas utilization is not going away. In fact, it's increasing by their projections in 2050. Now, a little more on my background so I can set up some subsequent discussions. I did grow up in Midland, and I went on to get my geophysics degree at the University of Texas. My wife and I started our first company on only $25,000, but thanks to great ideas and even better people, we've now created 6 substantial companies, hundreds of direct jobs and probably thousands indirectly, and along the way made a lot of money for our shareholders. We've taken 2 companies public, sold 2 companies, and are currently merging another into a $5 billion enterprise. Importantly, where I'm going with that is I recognized from the founding of my first company that to be successful, to create value for our shareholders, which is our core responsibility, we have to take good care of our employees, we have to be good stewards of the communities and the environment that we operate in. Not only have our shareholders won, but all of our stakeholders have benefited. I would put our company's environmental accomplishments up against any company in our industry. And I had a slide in the deck illustrating that is the beauty of capitalism, because American companies have also focused on their core responsibility to create value for shareholders. They've benefited all the stakeholders, including the environment. Again, contrary to the public narrative, our emissions have been declining while our flourishing, our GDP has gone up into the right, and we have among the cleanest air and water of any major country. So I asked a friend of mine who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Texas, I said, what do you think about this ESG movement? And it's great how philosophers can put things in very succinct terms. And as he thought about it, he said simply, it's the politicization of commerce. And he's right. So, and I'm going to provide you a couple of specific examples of how corruptive it is, looking at the ESG movement. And these are my examples. So our companies, I have a slide that illustrates this, but our companies over the years have raised a lot of capital privately and publicly. And we were doing a capital raise with a bank, Credit Suisse, that we've raised over $1 billion with over 15 years or so, probably closer to $2 billion. They and another bank had invested a lot of time and effort in a potential transaction. And the time came where we had moved sufficiently far where they need to go to the investment committee to get approval. The other bank came back that same day and said, we've got approval, thumbs up, let's go forward. Did not hear anything from Credit Suisse for several days. And so finally I called them, and he called me back, and he said, Bud, we may not be the right bank for you. And I said, really, why? And he said, and he kind of hesitated, he said, climate change is real, and it's not debatable. And I said, really? I said, well, I'm a geophysicist. I know climate change is real. Climate's always changed. It always will. But science is about debate. And he hemmed and hawed, and we had a prolonged discussion. He said, I'll tell you what, maybe there's a misunderstanding. He said, how about if I can get you some bullets to tweet? If you will tweet those out, I think there's a good chance we can go ahead and do this deal. So at that point, I knew there's no way we were going to do the deal. But I said, okay, I'm headed to a basketball game. If you will email those over to me, I'll take a look at them and we'll see. And to my surprise, he did. He emailed them over that night, and I've got the email. Now, a couple of the bullets that he suggested are not a problem at all. One was agree that climate change is occurring and that carbon is contributing to climate change and global warming. Yes, of course it is. I think there's not a climate catastrophe, but that as a statement is true. Another is believe that man is contributing to the addition of carbon in the atmosphere. Yes, of course. CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and we are contributing. But the other two are problematic. Agree that company activities should be aligned with the Paris Agreement. I absolutely do not agree. That is not a treaty. It was not ratified, and I don't think it should be a treaty. Believe that companies should have a commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. I absolutely do not agree with that. I think that would be immense human destruction, and we're seeing just the attempt at that in Europe, how destructive that actually is in reality. So I was personally very offended by that. I mean, for them to use their power, their access to capital, to try to suppress my freedom of speech, to try to coerce us into their political viewpoint, I found to be offensive. We got another bank and a very good bank, so we're going to be fine. The second example, but that is happening in our industry. The second example was a passive mineral company that owns mineral interests in shale plays around the country. And the ESG ratings for the S gave solar companies based out of China that actually engage in slave labor a higher ESG rating than our passive mineral company. So there's a piece written by Chuck DeVore about this that we can provide. So obviously that's just absolutely ridiculous. So I want to wrap up, and my closing comment is, it's thanks to private property rights and the energy freedom that we have in the U.S., absent historically extensive government intervention, we've enjoyed plentiful, low-cost energy and a continuing reduction in emissions. I mean, a lot of conversation about energy transition. We're already in an emissions transition, and it's been happening due to the private sector innovating, driving down costs, driving up efficiencies, which is driving down emissions. On the other hand, you're seeing in Europe when government gets active and starts to tilt the playing field, and central planning does not work, and we're seeing higher emissions in Europe. We're seeing elevated energy costs, and we could have people dying and freezing due to intermittent, unreliable energy. So ESG and these other crony political movements are disruptive and put us, unfortunately, on a path to Europe. So I'll conclude my comments there. Thank you.
Mr. Brigham, thank you. Senator Cole, of course, has a question for you.
Mr. Brigham, can you again quote was it the University of Texas philosopher?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
The philosopher that you quoted
Yeah,
from the University of Texas. I'm not a UT fan, but I want to hear that quote again. What
yeah,
was
his
that
name
quote?
is Professor Salmeiri, Greg Salmeiri.
And what was the quote again? Was it
Greg.
true? What was the quote again? Did he say when you asked him about this?
I asked him what he thought about ESG.
And what was his answer?
He said ESG appears to be the politicization of commerce, which it is.
And one more question. I think it was a bank, a financial institution.
Credit Suisse, yes.
What was the name of it?
Credit Suisse.
And no surprise there. But and so you had to sign the bullet. You had all those bullet points.
They said, if you will tweet out these bullets, I think there's a good chance we will do this transaction
What
with
did
you.
they ask you to do?
To tweet out those 4 bullets.
To tweet it.
To tweet it.
And then you could get the loan.
Yeah, he apparently found my tweets to be offensive and not aligned with his political views. And so he was obviously seeking to line up my political views and our company's views with that of
Now,
his.
this is a new one. So if you tweet something, you can get the loan. I'm not sure that's ethical, but okay. And then the other thing is, I was going to ask you, you are based out of?
Austin, Texas. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how long have you been in oil and gas?
33 years or so. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I started in
And I
1984.
want to make sure again, you didn't have to sign an agreement. You had to tweet out the form.
Yes, and the banker that I was talking to his credit, he was trying to be commercial. He was trying to create value for Credit Suisse. A gentleman on the investment committee had a problem with my political views and wanted a statement from me lining up that with the Paris Climate Accord and net zero by 2050. And the banker indicated, if you will tweet those bullets out, I think there's a good chance we can move forward with the transaction.
Boy, this is really new to me. Very familiar with financial institutions. I didn't know to get loans, we have to tweet our political stances.
Yeah, and again, I want to say the banker, to his credit, he's trying to be commercial as he should. He's trying to live up to his fiduciary obligation to create value for the firm. It's the gentleman on the investment committee that was bringing politics into business, which I view as being extremely destructive. And again, that's how I view the ESG movement. To me, business, it's like church and state. Politics and business don't mix, and it's very destructive. That's my view.
Mr. Brigham, thank you. And you and Senator Cole, of course, made this very clear. I want to make sure I got everything right. So there wasn't a question about whether this was a good deal for the bank. Wasn't a question about credit worthiness. You had done $1 billion with them before. Is that what you said?
Over $1 billion, probably approaching $2 billion, and we had made the bank a tremendous amount of money.
Yes, sir.
It was a win-win relationship.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Senator Betancourt.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Hughes, and I appreciate your testimony. I just wanted to go over a couple points. You made a comment about capitalism being fundamental to American exceptionalism, and the fact that you talked about this relationship because there's a fiduciary obligation, okay, that you certainly represented to your shareholders, okay, and I share it was astonishment when you had the bank that you had done business with say, just tweet out these 4 things and we can get this loan, right?
Right. Now, they weren't explicit that if I tweeted them out, they would definitely move forward, but the implication was if I tweet that out, he felt like we had a good chance to move forward.
Right, but you've got people that are supposedly having a discussion about fiduciary obligations on both sides, one to the bank shareholders, another to you and your shareholders of the company. And what crops up in a meeting is, well, if you just tweet these 4 Now, did they even know if you had a Twitter account? Did they check?
Apparently, the gentleman on the investment committee follows me on Twitter.
And the end of the story was?
The end of the story was we found another bank and moved on.
Well, that was the right decision for your fiduciary
Yes.
responsibilities, and it showed that he made the wrong decision by suggesting it in the first place.
Yes.
Now, you made a comment too as well. You said that there's a ESG scoring rating system, that we've got Chinese companies with higher ratings than American companies. You want to elaborate on that?
Yes, and there's an excellent piece written by Chuck DeVore on that about a Chinese solar firm that apparently has slave labor, and the video I was going to show was an example of that, children working in slave labor and cobalt mining, and that firm had a higher S rating on ESG than the mineral company.
Right, and that's Chuck DeVore with Texas Public Policy
Yes,
Foundation.
and we can provide that.
So you've got a company with a slave labor situation. We don't know whether it's the Uyghurs or what it is, but it's probably Western China. And that doesn't factor into an ESG rating. And clearly, so you have a company of total lack of moral turpitude is higher ranked than American energy companies.
Yes, apparently so.
And you made a comment that I just want to emphasize. We're talking about what is really affordable energy, and the fact that in America we have the best, clean water, clean air, legal and environmental, technology, really in the world. But yet we're having this structure imposed, this ESG structure that's imposed from on what should be a normal market, discussion of what's best for consumers. And given the fact that we are leading the world in environmental technologies at the same time, it's pretty preposterous that we're being basically, that a company like yourself gets even, for lack of a better description, threatened at a negotiation table, having to tweet out 4 things that it might be better for us to be able to get a loan, even though you've done over $1 billion of loans with this bank before.
Yeah, it's really perverse when you think about it. It's the United States that innovates, whether it's medicine, whether it's technology, whether it's energy, whether it's entertainment. It's the United States that innovates because we have private property and we have economic liberty. And the irony is that the ESG movement is really a direct attack on that private property, because it is undermining the fiduciary obligation that managers have to the owners by outside special interests, who, as in the case of Credit Suisse, have political agendas and objectives, and they're trying to force that on these private enterprises.
Right, and just the last comment is with in our social norms of having no child labor, no concentration camps, et cetera, are not the rule in China, but yet an ESG ranking system can rank a solar Chinese company higher than higher than American energy companies.
Yeah.
When they should have been completely not only disqualified but declared an anathema internationally as a result.
Exactly, a clear bias against American companies that are outperforming.
Well, thanks for being being a promotion of the obvious, which is capitalism is the fundamental basis for American exceptionalism. Thank you for your decades of service in that regard.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Brigham, thank you for coming up here. Thanks for your testimony, and thank you for sharing with us what's been happening.
Yeah.
Please keep providing those jobs and that energy. We need you. Texas needs you to keep doing that, please.
Thank you, Senator. We'll keep working hard.
Thank you
very
for being
much.
Thank you. As we prepare to call the next 2 witnesses, I'll mention another thing to be aware of and to watch for as we hear the testimony. We've talked about oil and gas. There's also a very important fossil fuel that has provided clean burning energy